You're listening to Finn Voices on Healthcare Now Radio, where we highlight and amplify the voices at the forefront of health innovation that improves people's lives. Join us for an inside look at the change makers driving conversation and answering the most important questions in healthcare today. Thanks for joining us.
I'm Goel Jasper, managing partner with Finn Partners. You're listening to Finn Voices. Noga Devecseri Spira is with me today. She's partner and the co-lead of the high-tech practice at Naschitz Brandes Amir, a top law firm in Israel. And as a basketball fan, like to call it NBA. I understand I'm not the only one who likes to call it NBA. Noga's been guiding and counseling Israeli innovators for 25 years, so she certainly has a perspective on the space. She's also been admitted to both the Israeli and California bars. So she really is in the sweet spot of knowledge for Israeli innovators who are looking to make their mark in the U.S. And that is why I wanted to speak with you today, Noga. So welcome.
Thanks, Goel. Pleasure to be here.
Did I get anything wrong?
No, it's perfect.
Okay, great. So listen, we got to start earlier on. I don't want to jump right into business. Tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up? How did you get into this? A little bit about your background.
Sure. So I'm not sure if we have enough time, but just in a nutshell, I was born in Canada, raised in Thailand, East Africa, West Africa, and Israel. And I wasn't thinking of working as an attorney. It was more of a kind of a college degree. But having worked at the legal department of the Hebrew University, it became interesting. Things like trademarks of Professor Einstein, putting together the legal framework for the Science Museum in Jerusalem. But I think that the biggest motivation for me to keep going as an attorney had to do with my time in Silicon Valley. It's where I started working with startup companies, publicly traded companies focused on tech. And it was a very special experience, this opportunity to work with innovators and with really smart people, interesting, different sectors, really interesting, always cutting edge. So here I am, still more than 25 years.
Yeah, the truth is, I'd love to talk about Canada, Thailand, East Africa, and West Africa, but it's not necessarily why people are tuning in. However, what a fascinating upbringing that must have been. And do you think that there's anything about that kind of upbringing that lends itself to working in the world of innovation?
As background, my father was a civil engineer, and he was really interested in working on the biggest project, whether it's the biggest dam in Canada or the biggest road system in Thailand. And it lends to innovation where you go after the big challenges. And even if it's not necessarily your comfort zone, you still go at it and try to make your dreams come true.
Let's shift now to more modern days. So how long were you in Silicon Valley helping companies there, and talk a little bit about your experience there as being as foundational as it seems that it was?
So I was there for about 4 years. Part of the time I wasn't working because I took the California bar exam, and it's a very long process. Even the exam itself is 3 days. When I started working there, it was a very based on a cut to the chase attitude. It was like we have a short window of opportunity for each company, so we really need to move fast. We need to have negotiations short and sweet and move ahead. And this attitude, I think, is not only the legal approach, but in general, it's very typical when you work with high-tech companies.
And so when you talk about short and sweet, are you referring to just because innovation happens at such a fast pace? Did it have to do with funding that the companies had and their burn rate and their concern about getting things done quickly? Like, what What was the catalyst for that need for speed, so to speak?
So I think it's you're touching on one which is very obvious, but also when negotiating with customers, you cannot. I mean, if you, for example, you're negotiating with the hospital and they usually have negotiations over months, you cannot really afford it at the high tech company. You need to accelerate the pace. And I think it's going to be even more so down the road. Uh, Looking at AI, for example, you don't know when your solution is going to, how it's going necessarily to work with AI in the field in general. So you really need to put the foot in the door to have the product up at the customer working and make sure that it fits into the ecosystem rather than finding out too late that there are other solutions that are replacing yours.
Innovation waits for no one. So then you come back to Israel. I guess that was around 20 years ago. Is my math correct? 22 years ago, maybe?
At 24, 5.
And what happened then? What did you decide to do?
Actually, it was an easy decision to continue working as a lawyer at a law firm. So I was looking for a law firm that is very business oriented. So Naschitz Brandes Amir was a perfect fit, and I've been there since then.
Straight through. What was it about the firm that was so attractive to you?
First and foremost, it's a really nice firm. And secondly, it's really about the business approach. For example, when I joined, I believe that most, if not all, of the law firms in Israel were not flexible about fee arrangements with startup companies. And at Naschitz Brandes Amir, I was my own boss, so I could determine which fee engagement which made sense. So that enables working with very early stage startups, which, by the way, is still the case today.
Right. Now, given your upbringing, I don't know how Israeli you consider yourself. Obviously, you've been in Israel for many years now. But do you see yourself almost like someone who is somewhat of an outsider counseling Israelis?
Not necessarily, and I'm guessing that the fact that I was in the Israeli Defense Force, by the way, as a paramedic, it ties you in very strongly. So it's more about feeling as an Israeli, advising Israeli startups, but when reaching out to partners, whether it's investors or customers or channels outside of Israel, I do have the benefit of my past experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I moved here 20 years ago to Israel, and obviously, as a 33-year-old with 5 children, the IDF was not necessarily seeing me at the top of their list for potential recruits. So I did not have the benefit of serving in the IDF, but I have 2 sons who have served, one who is looking forward to serving. And it's unbelievable how serving in the Army is such a major part of the culture here. And I see the way my older son, for example, who's been, of course, in and out of the reserves over the last year and a half for many, many days, how his thought process has evolved based on his Army experience. It really is. It forms professionals here, doesn't it?
Indeed, and I think it also encourages you to think big and not necessarily to follow the common path. It's fine to do things differently, and it's fine to try. And that's actually probably a major factor in the Israeli innovation ecosystem.
Well, that's interesting because normally when people think about the military on a global scale, I think they probably think, very conservative. This is the way we do it here. Each thing has to be done just so. Make sure your bed is made properly so that you can bounce a quarter on the mattress. That kind of thing. But I guess part of what you're hinting at is that the IDF is a little different.
I would say there's an additional layer, which is about your 19 or 20, and suddenly either you're an officer or you can be a commander and non-officer commander. It gives you so much responsibility, confidence, and also I think exactly what we were talking about earlier, the self-belief, so you can try things that maybe are not the regular path.
Thank you very much for talking a little bit about your background. Let's talk about the Israeli startup scene. You know, having been around it for a quarter of a century, obviously things today are not what they used to be. Talk about the evolution of the innovation ecosystem here and where things are today versus where they were when you started.
So I think in that sense, there's much similarity between Israel and the US, because when I started working, and I had the opportunity when returning to Israel, working basically from day one with healthtech startups, it was all about the infrastructure, the IT system, medical records, and when you look at it now, many years later, it's still all of that, but so much more. You're looking at services that were once part of the medical team's responsibility, but now it's suddenly online. For example, using your smartphone camera for diagnostic purposes. For example, drug development being accelerated by AI, different analysis of different medical results. So it's a true revolution. But as much as it is one, I still think, and I think there's unanimity about it, that there's so much more to do in different aspects. So we're still looking for a lot of innovation to come into this field.
So that's wonderful perspective in terms of the subject matter, the innovation itself. What about the running of the businesses? You know, the way a startup thinks when trying to grow up, when trying to perhaps get to the US or seek regulatory approval for a device or a therapy, et cetera. How much has Israel changed over the years in that respect?
So from my perspective, this is where Israel used to be much more different than the US, and we're now closer because when I started working with health tech startups, it was about this is an amazing solution and it saves lives, it helps people. But now we're really looking at the startups, and they come not only with that portion, which obviously is really important, but also here is the product market fit. So it's looking about what regulation pass is needed, who is going to pay for the services, and what kind of route you need to follow in order to be able to be entitled for payment. So this is a real change over the years, and obviously it's a critical one. I would also say that obviously over the years the issue of privacy has evolved significantly. So here as well, I see the Israeli startups catching up with what is needed, and this is always a sensitive issue. For example, you're discussing a sale to a U.S. hospital, you need to find out, for example, if they have also operations in Canada, so you also comply with Canadian privacy law. So it's really about seeing the big picture, deciding where your market is, and making sure that you're in sync with the legal framework.
So just let's play around with this a little bit. So when a company would come to you like 23 years ago, a health tech startup with no reimbursement strategy, no understanding of how technologies must fit in to the system in the US, you know, how in the provider systems, IT has probably the most power because they can say no so easily. What would you do? How would you help companies through this when they came to you just saying, hey, our product's awesome, we just need a law firm? What did you used to do in those cases?
The answer to this big question is often channels, especially if you're a small team located in Israel and you need to chase the decision makers and you need to get champion in the different health institutions. And I'm taking US as an example because that usually applies to the Israeli startups. So it's really hard to do it when you sit here. Getting on board a US team member who is senior is very expensive. So often you need to find the right partner, and they also help you work through the issue of the reimbursement and the different US aspects, whether it's scaling up or others. And I'm putting it in front as an answer, but obviously it is a big challenge to find the right partner. Often when you find the right partner, they're looking for exclusivity. You need to be very careful about finding the balance where the partner has enough comfort so they can put significant effort into selling your product, but having flexibility if the partner is not doing well enough to pull out of this arrangement.
So that explains, in general, how you recommend that entrepreneurs tackle these issues. I'm asking a different question, which is, when they would come to you 23 years ago, without any level of sophistication back then, they just didn't understand. They had the Israeli system and they just assumed that the American system was like the Israeli system. Were they open, or were they more arrogant back then than they are today, and willing to listen? And what was it like?
Actually, my experience has always been that the entrepreneurs understand that the US system is very different from the Israeli one. So my answer was actually addressing the 25 years ago.
Oh, okay.
I think that, for example, the issue of funding, you do have many Israeli health tech startups that raise significant amounts on day one or very fast, and they can afford putting together a US team on the ground. And you have, I think, also a much stronger network between the Israeli health tech and the US health tech. So it's much easier than it used to be.
Okay. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your craft a little more. Startups, especially Israeli startups, they're either in stealth mode or they want everyone to know how incredible they are right now. So stealth mode, I think, in your line of work, that's very comfortable. There's really little to worry about in terms of people saying the wrong thing or publishing the wrong thing or whatever. But once they get out there and they want to talk about how incredible their innovation is, what's the role that you can play to help them with that? Allowing them, on the one hand, to promote because you understand the value of marketing, and at the same time protecting the company from doing or saying the wrong thing.
So this is a great question, Goel, and I think it goes back to my craft being an art rather than a science, because what we're looking for is really finding a balance where the startup does go out to the open and does a lot of PR, but the PR is of the offering, kind of what the benefit would be to the customers and to the patients, as opposed to the secret sauce, how it is done. And if I look for a minute at the issue of patents, that's where it also has it clearly is the concern, because obviously getting patent protection is great, but then you discover the secret sauce. So really, each startup needs to find the balance. But as a general rule of thumb, you should be able to go and shout out how wonderful you are, because I think we'd rather take some risk rather than be an amazing startup, but sitting in Israel and being unable to form any partnerships or get the products running on the ground at customers. So that's, as you said, it's a very sensitive topic. And we do craft it on a case-by-case basis.
Are there any trends in terms of mistakes that you see companies make along the way that you can advise for people who are starting their own companies, or even having progressed a little bit in the venture that they're building? What kind of mistakes are people making?
I would stick to the big one, which is monetization. It's really complex, because even if, for example, you're able to show an ROI, so it's if the hospital buys your offering, they're going to do some savings. If they don't have a budget, they won't be buying it. And just as an example, during COVID days, which we all prefer to put aside, but actually it was a great accelerator for healthtech companies. You really had to make sure that you're focused not only on the ROI, but also on the roadmap of the health institution. So I think that topic still requires by most startups to do more homework. And I do have to say, Goel, and I'm sure you know it more than I do, that the US reimbursement system makes it a very challenging topic. But that would probably be my big concern when looking at an early stage startup.
The logical mind, and many in the Israeli entrepreneurial ecosystem have logical minds. The logical mind would say, if there's a code for reimbursement of my product or of my service, everything's fine. And so they often don't understand that that's only the beginning of the path. I mean, it's a nice update for the path, but it's not the end of the road by any means.
And you need to look at each phase in the process, not only at what it means for the patient or the hospital, but also the different agents involved in the process.
So, okay, last question, and then I'm going to let you go. And thank you so much for your time. I'm a startup, and I'm just getting started. How can NBA help me, or should I wait a little while? Like, when's the right time for an entrepreneur to start the process with you guys?
As many of our clients have done, the minute you start thinking of a startup goal, come over, because it's usually the infrastructure put in place in the first days, which becomes critical later down the road. And solving these mistakes can be very expensive. Maybe as an example, if, for example, you decide to have a parent company and then a subsidiary, where is the intellectual property going to be held? This is a critical point. And it's all of these decisions are taken on day number one. Oh, for example, you start maybe with different POCs, making sure that the agreements cover your liability. It's an issue that would be a major concern for investors and for an acquisition down the road. And working with a top law firm such as us is doable, given the flexible engagement arrangements we have in place. So we are totally focused on the early stage startups. We love working with companies through the different stages up to their IPO, after the IPO, until the acquisition. And Goel, we're looking forward to working with you on your next startup.
Sounds good. As soon as I come up with an idea, I guess my first call is to you. Noga Devecseri Spira, partner and co-lead of the high-tech practice at NBA, Naschitz Brandes Amir. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today, educating us and sharing a little bit about how you've gotten to where you are today. If anyone wants to reach you, what should they do?
My email is online, and I'm happy to share it, Goel, any way you prefer.
Okay. Sure, go ahead. You can say it right now.
So it's N for Noga, Spira, S-P-I-R-A, at nblaw.com.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much for your time. You've been listening to Finn Voices. Until next time, this is Goel Jasper.
Finn Voices is brought to you by Finn Partners, a global marketing and communications agency working across industries and services. Whether inside our walls or on the front lines of health transformation, we stand together to create meaningful and measurable impact in the world around us. Learn more at finnpartners.com and follow us on Twitter @FinnPartners.